Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me for today's Art Chat conversation. I'm Julia Jessen. I'm the Curator of Collections and Exhibitions here at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. And this Art Chat is part of a series of conversations that will be taking place during the run of our Landscape, Climate, the Environment, and Beyond exhibition. And these chats are going to feature conversations with some of the artists who are included in the exhibition. We're very pleased and excited to be joined today by the artist Thomas Agran. And before we get into our conversation, I did just want to tell you a little bit about him. So Thomas was born in Kentucky and raised in Ohio. He currently lives in Iowa City. He has a degree from Grinnell College and received his Master of Fine Arts degree in painting from Indiana University. Thomas has taught painting and drawing at the university level since 2011 and worked for 3 years as the Director of Public Art for the Iowa City Downtown District. In addition to his studio work, he has also designed, executed, managed, and mentored dozens of mural projects. In his work, Thomas is particularly interested in the Midwest and the Midwestern landscape, including its transformation through agriculture and the political, social, and environmental consequences of that change. So Thomas is a great person for us to start with for these chats, especially in relation to this exhibition in which he is featured. So thank you so much, Thomas, for joining us, and welcome to this Art Chats.
Great, thank you for having me.
Of course. I wanted to start by asking you about your piece in the exhibition, which is the one that we're looking at right now. This is Bison Nest from 2023. I'm wondering if you can start by telling us a bit more about this piece and what led to its creation.
Sure thing. So this work kind of was an outgrowth of some time that I spent at the Hallgrass Artist Residency, which is out in the Flint Hills in Kansas, which has kind of one of the largest on somewhat untouched tracts of prairie and open space that you can really find near us. It's not really possible to find that kind of landscape in Iowa anymore. So I was there for about 10 days, and I actually found it a landscape that was a little bit difficult to engage with. Like the prairie has a kind of impenetrable quality to it. And so I found these in one of the sections of the reserve, they have a bison herd. And so you can sort of see their impact on the landscape. And I really was drawn to the gesture that they left in the grass. So in this kind of unending sort of anarchic monotony that is the prairie, to find these moments where things have been sort of moved and tousled and stuff, and the presence of the animals on the landscape was really visible through that evidence. That was something that was really exciting to me, and something that I felt like also for how I approach making artwork in a more formal sense, I felt like there was something for me to chew on there visually and something exciting to explore.
Fabulous. And I'm showing a few images, I think, of your time there and some of the spots that you were noticing. I'm curious, when you were engaging with these spots, you've captured this fleeting evidence of the bison's presence and its impact on the land. What drew you to that ephemeral gesture rather than perhaps to a depiction of the animal itself?
Sure. Well, for one, there's a famous sign at this reserve of somebody being sort of ejected by a buffalo bison, and so they demand that you keep a really strong distance from them, for one, but also I'm really interested in the landscape itself and ways of kind of connecting and being immersed in the landscape in a way that feels really I don't know, pure to me or something. I sometimes think a little bit about people who like to hunt, who, I have a friend whose father likes to hunt and he never comes back with anything. But I think that there's an intentionality to how you experience the outdoors when you're hunting. And I think of like working in on plein air, like working outside on location, as being something akin to that, in a way to really feel connected to the landscape. It's, I don't think that I would ever sit and stay in one spot for such a long period of time if I weren't doing this. And so that kind of structured way of engaging with the landscape through the artwork is something that's really exciting to me. And also really quickly, like I love the kind of immediacy that is demanded when you work from a live model. And kind of during the pandemic, a lot of earlier days of the pandemic, a lot of the kind of opportunities to work with the human model went away. And so I started painting and drawing outside a lot because, again, there was that sort of urgency that you feel when you have a limited access to the subject that I think creates ultimately more exciting artwork.
Sure. Yeah. Um, and so when you were working on site, you were working with charcoal, is that right?
Yeah. So during this time at this residency, I did a lot of paintings and stuff. Where this was kind of a hike in, and so I just brought kind of dry media and
Mhm.
charcoal. And I love working with charcoal again for that kind of immediacy. There's really not you're not mixing a lot of colors. There's not all this clobber. You just bring a couple simple tools and plunk yourself down. And um, so yeah, it's a really raw medium, and so it felt like the right thing to bring in that moment. So I worked those on location, and then the painting that's in the exhibition was kind of an outgrowth of that of those drawings. And I was interested in, if I did have more time, having had that kind of experience in the landscape, to understand what was exciting to me about it. How would those manifest as larger pieces?
Mhm. And with the piece too, you've kept to, starting with the charcoal drawings, and then even in the acrylic on panel piece, you kept to the monochromatic, to this kind of black and white color. Um, can you talk more about that?
Sure. I mean, I would be the first person in the way that Midwesterners do to sort of wax poetic about the nuances of our landscape and the colors of the prairie and stuff. So
Mhm.
I'm there with everybody for that.
Yeah.
But I think in this moment, like that kind of gesture of the landscape felt really natural to me to work in a kind of grisaille, black and white approach. Again, it just sort of simplified things and made it more about the mark making. And I'm kind of interested in what's called calligraphic mark making. So lines that kind of um, trace across the surface, expanding from thicker to thinner, and how that can be used in an expressive or evocative way to capture a sense of movement or tension in a piece. So it just felt right to work in black and white. And I also, we all have our own sensitivities as artists. And I really love strong contrast, and I love drawings. And so sometimes monochromatic approaches sort of fit into a very comfortable place for me in the studio.
Yeah, yeah. And I think a very effective statement here too. Absolutely. That kind of leads into thinking about the broader span of your work, I think, and how this piece fits in, because you've engaged with landscapes of the Midwest in multiple different ways. I'm going to show a few images here.
Mhm.
But a few past series, we've got postcards from Iowa, livestock, American landscapes, development potential. And so I'm wondering, how do you see Bison Nest fitting into the overall span of your work and how you're engaging with the Midwest landscape?
Sure. How much time do we have, right? So, I, I have, I think like anybody who is alive right now, and especially maybe in my age group, who sort of like came of age in a increasingly greater awareness of climate change and stuff. The environmental stresses are something that is like hard for me to compartmentalize.
Mhm.
And so I can tell you that like painting bleak images of feedlots and carved up farmland by developers and whatever is not necessarily like a great business move for subject matter. But I find it really hard to shy away from those subjects because I live in them and I'm surrounded by them. And so, that's kind of manifested in a lot of different bodies of work, some that focused on like these kind of atmospheric images of confinement agriculture. Some were like sort of these more nostalgic and highly rendered pieces of livestock that were kind of allegorical paintings about livestock. And then these more recent ones are, really grew out of a time where I could be in a landscape that was more unadulterated. Even the Flint Hills, of course, have a history of open range and cattle ranching and so forth. But I was curious, like in my time there, to sort of see what would I make that was impacted. How does my artwork look when I'm actually with the sort of real landscape of the prairie states rather than our kind of industrialized version of the landscape. And so I don't always have my thoughts exactly gathered on it, which I think is why it's sort of manifested in my work in a lot of different aesthetics. These like images that you have up right now, I feel very different, to me in terms of the ultimate appearance than what's in the show right now.
Mm-hmm.
But the thread that connects them feels very linear and strong to me.
Yeah. In your statement for the piece for Bison Nest, which, by the way, you submitted with another piece too as kind of a diptych, and we included the right panel in the exhibition. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting that you said in your statement, and I'm going to quote you here. So, quote, "Sometimes it feels as if our beloved Iowa regionalists had the last say on the landscape here. But their vision of Iowa is now but a nostalgic mythology, and under the weight of climate change, revision of how we depict our landscape is more urgent than ever." And I thought that was a really interesting statement. I'm wondering if you can expand on it and how you locate yourself within this legacy of Iowa landscape art, or if you think of yourself as outside of that legacy and kind of contrasting against it, or opposing it in some way.
Sure. So, I love regionalist work. I love the kind of ideas behind it and also, the paintings and drawings themselves. And I love, mural work of the kind of, WPA, PWAP era. And so, lots of Thomas Hart Benton and so forth. So, like, I have a real soft spot in my heart for this kind of work that also deals with a subject matter that feels maybe overlooked by lots of the world, and um and so at the same time, those images that have now proliferated through marketing and whatever, and you can go buy your gallon of milk that's got the stylized Iowa landscape on it, even though probably the milk came from a feedlot out in Utah. It just doesn't feel like a real version of Iowa anymore. There's vestiges of it, there's evidence of it, on the landscape, but we don't really live in the Iowa that Marvin Cohn and Grant Wood were depicting. And so it seems important to me, because I really care about this state, to say, well, that's not what's happening here anymore. And you can't hardly swim in a single lake in Iowa because of all of the agricultural runoff. I mean, it's just a different place. It's a really much more like a factory than it is like a farm. And so I think it's just important to have, I think the best artwork, ideally speaks to the moment and speaks to the context of those people that will be witnessing it or observing it. And so it just feels important to me. And I also, when you are making work in the Midwest and lots of the sort of energy and attention of the art world is on the coasts, I think, well, why, if I'm going to be making artwork here, like, who am I making work for and why am I making it? And if it's being exhibited here, what responsibility do I have to the landscape here? And I have lots of friends who are landscape painters and paint beautiful. There's still lots of beautiful vistas in Iowa, even if they're full of monocrops and so forth. But I think it's important to have a a new perspective, I guess, that acknowledges the realities that are actually going on around us.
Sure.
A little meandering, sorry.
No, that was great. Do you think of yourself as a contemporary regionalist?
Well, I'm sure anybody from the East Coast probably would, right? You know, I don't know. I guess by default, because I'm really interested in the kind of nuances and issues of the place that I live. But I think also there are lots of people who are interested in the nuances and realities of the places they live, and they live other places besides the Midwest. Um, so I don't know. It's a good question, and um, I don't know. I don't have an answer to that, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, regionalism can exist all over the place. Yeah, and
Sure.
looks different in different spaces as well. Absolutely. I want to make sure to spend a little time on your mural work as well. So let's get to those. Um, can you tell us about your approach to the murals? Um, how did you, were you always doing murals? When did you start doing murals? What was that transition like from working smaller to working on this kind of monumental scale?
Sure. So I've always enjoyed working large. And so the transition from a 6 foot painting to a 60-foot wall might seem big, but in ways it felt like a natural progression. And I did my first sort of large-ish scale mural in Iowa City on the co-op here, the food co-op in downtown Iowa City. And and I got sort of, hooked on doing it. It felt really good to be working, especially right after graduate school, where you really have a kind of insular mindset to being outdoors and talking to people who are curious about what I was up to and so forth. I have a lot of interest in my own community and improving my community. And so there were not very many murals in Iowa City when I did that 10 years ago. And so it all felt very exciting. And I also figured out that it was a way that I could make money as an artist. That murals actually paid quite well, and so I sort of it's been a core part of my career, really for about the last decade in terms of paying my mortgage. At the same time, sometimes there are projects that are maybe not as exciting to me artistically, and sometimes they are really quite aligned. And so, at the one that you have up
Mhm.
was a project in Iowa City. It's actually two walls that are 175 feet long. And these were painted as an outgrowth of that time at that residency. So while I was there, it was like 110 degrees in Kansas. I was there in July. And during the hottest part of the day, I made a lot of cyanotypes, which are a kind of
Mm.
early Victorian photographic technique that uses these chemicals with this striking blue color. And so it was a way to kind of capture stuff and create some source material. And I sort of cut all that stuff up, collaged it, and then hand painted these murals on this building. And I hesitate always to apply like overwrought meaning to a mural or whatever, but it
Mhm.
felt like interesting to me to have all these prairie textures in a state where those prairie textures are actually increasingly difficult, if not impossible, to find. And also Anna Atkins, who pioneered this kind of photographic technique called cyanotype. I think her first book of them, which is the first book with photographs published, was in I think 1846, and that's the same year that like John Deere introduced the moldboard plow, which of course was like adios to the American prairie on the Central Plains. So yeah, so this was a really exciting project, really big project, and also one that felt very linked to things that I'm interested in the studio as well.
Mhm. As you've been working on these murals, are there things that you've realized work and don't work when you're working at that scale?
In terms of like subject matter or
Yeah, subject or style or really
yeah,
anything.
one of
Yeah.
the exciting things about mural making and working with clients is that there are design constraints. So the texture of the wall may prevent softer rendering if it's a really rough wall, or really crisp lines can be difficult to do on really rough walls and so forth. And so I really love how I mural making presents an opportunity for me to sometimes work a little bit outside of my normal technique or approach. And so my murals are sometimes really like this one that you have up is from last summer. And it's a big aerial view of the watershed, something that I've done at a smaller scale in the studio, but was super exciting to do really big. And honestly, when I started, I thought, boy, I don't know, I hope I can pull this off. And so that's a very different mural than the prairie one, which has these soft, crisp edges and stuff, lots of sort of shading and so forth, and then sometimes they're really graphic and have harder edges and so forth. And so I just love that it gets me to do things I might not otherwise do, and I enjoy expressing that versatility that I have as an artist in that client artist relationship.
Sure, yeah. I want to make sure that we allow enough time for questions, but before I open it up, I want to ask what you're working on now and what's next for you.
Well, I just stretched two really big canvases, which I made this colossal error in judgment, which is that I stretched them in my studio. They're like two kind of 8-foot square canvases that come together for one painting, but I don't actually have a way to get them out of my studio. They don't fit back through the door. So I got to figure all this out, but that's what I'm working on now. And it's, I've been painting outside a whole lot with a friend here. His name is Ezra Edgerton, who's another great artist that people could check out. He and I paint outside a lot. And so I'm interested in again, sort of exploring the landscape in studio work as it's informed by my time spent actually outdoors in the landscape. And so what can I do at scale in the studio that's different than what I do outside?
Sure.
This most recent one is I'm working from some source images that I took earlier this winter of a bulldozed fence line that has these elements that feel kind of evocative of a kind of crucifixion motif. So suffice it to say, another big seller, is the bulldozed fence row. Lots of buyers for that, but that's okay. One of the nice things about doing the murals is it's helped separate the need to make money from my studio work and that makes it more liberating in the studio because I can really make work that I want to make instead of worrying about whether someone is going to want to purchase it or whatever. So anyway, working on a really big kind of winter landscape scene right now.
Interesting. Cool. I want to open it up to questions now. So are there any questions for Thomas about his work?
Hi, Thomas. This is Bob Miklo in Iowa City. A question about the grass image. Did you spend a lot of time designing the way the grass flows and interweaves, or did it just come organically to you?
I mean, I spent almost no time designing it because I worked off of source images from the time out in the Flint Hills, and so there's an element of improvisation in terms of that. I built that painting up sort of from general to specific, but the exact sort of twists and turns of the grass and so forth are faithful to the images that I was working from, and that feels exciting to me too because obviously I took 100 source pictures and I sorted through them and found the ones that were most interesting to me. But I think if I was inventing it, and this is something I often tell students, that invention is really difficult and you end up falling into kind of patterns of mark making or patterns of composition or iterative approaches to things. And so I always think whether it's from a photo or working from life, it demands that you come up with more novel solutions. And so I worked from a source image partially for that reason too, that I think if I tried to just invent that, I would kind of keep grabbing from the same shelf in the pantry.
Great. Other questions for Thomas?
Oh, I was kind of curious. So you mentioned that you have maybe like 100 source images that you have from the um, grass areas that are there. Is that a potential area to work on? So, or maybe I think I heard what there were two pictures or two images or charcoals that you submitted for the exhibit. Were there only two that you created, or did you create a lot more? And I'm just curious about kind of the random nature that is associated with the grasses, that there's also kind of an interest in being able to see many of those images to get something like a better span of the degree of randomness that comes out of those images.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought and question. I am sometimes a little scattered as an artist in my practice. And when I was out there working and spending like the whole day outside, I made quite a few charcoals on location. So I think maybe, I don't know, a half dozen or more, maybe 8 pieces, I don't know. And then I made these 2 big studio pieces when I came back. And, I like how those pieces turned out. I'm not sure that I know what's exciting to me about them that would sort of light that fire under me to make more. And sometimes I wonder whether that's like, oh, come on, Thomas, like, have you no ambition? Have you no focus and dedication? And sometimes I think, no, I think if you're not excited about this, then wait on it a little while and maybe it will surface again in other ways. So, um, I think that what you're saying about having a lot of them to look at so that you can see those differences is a really nice idea. And maybe I'll get there or maybe not. I don't know. Sometimes, a little bit of lack of focus in the studio is a problem, I think, and kind of always going to the next exciting press, the next canvas that you've stretched or whatever, the next idea. Sometimes maybe some bodies of work don't play out fully as they could. So I have a lot of I have a lot of, if you want pictures of piles of grass, I'm happy to share. Maybe you can do something with them, So I have a lot of photos partially just to, not every one of them is something that I felt like I could look at and understand how I would also want to translate that. I could almost see the photographs themselves. If I was a photographer, had taken those photographs maybe a little more thoughtfully, they could be kind of their own body of work. Maybe that speaks to what you're getting at more than I even could if I was then translating those by my hand. So.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Or maybe another thing is if somebody buys up all the ones that you have, that would be motivation to make some more.
Indeed. That's like that's supply and demand, right? So.
And there was a question in the chat about the size of the acrylic on panel work that's in the exhibit. And I don't think I have that measurement in front of me. Do you happen to remember off the top of your head, Thomas?
Yeah, they're about 4 feet by 6 feet. And I sometimes think about a comment that a painter I know made. Her name was Stephanie Pierce, and somebody asked her how big her works were. And she this was a lecture, and she kind of gestured and said, oh, I don't know, me size. And I really enjoy working large, partially because the act of like painting like this is not nearly as exciting and doesn't feel good in the same way that painting with your arm and your hand does. So it felt very natural to scale these up, not just because the subject matter was also large, but because it feels really good to paint from your arms and paint in a expansive way. It feels easier to me to be more gestural and a little bit looser in paint handling when they're a little larger. So those paintings are 4 feet by 6 feet. So when they come together as a pair, they're pretty big. Hence why there's only one in the exhibition. So.
Yes. And there was another question in the chat as well about your favorite medium. Do you have a favorite that you enjoy working with the most?
I have least favorites for sure.
That's interesting too. That's interesting too.
Yeah, I do some watercolor, but watercolor, boy, it's like a niche medium. People who are good at it are really, really good at it. And I don't have it in me or something. But I love, I was trained for what it's worth as a painter. And so I paint both in oil and acrylic. I enjoy the like viscerality of oil painting, and I also enjoy the like expedience and urgency of acrylic painting. So I really like building layers and kind of having a collage approach to how I build up a painting, and acrylic paint works really, really well for that. But I do both. And I also really love drawing. I had, one of my professors in undergrad at Grinnell was an artist, Bobby McKibben, who has a great love of drawing and is a wonderful pastelist, landscapist. And so drawing holds a really special spot in my practice. And charcoal and pencil and stuff. Again, it just feels like a very immediate, there's not a lot between you and the paper in a way that with painting there is a little bit more to think about. So the immediacy of drawing is always a really nice thing.
Great. Well, we are just about out of time. Are there any questions that you wish I would have asked and that you never get asked and you wish someone would ask you, Thomas?
Oh, no. This was a great conversation, and touched on, sometimes I think talking about my work and my practice is a little difficult because I do a lot of different things. But this conversation, I think, really touched on all those things in a way that I hope connects them for a way they feel connected to me. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think this was a really illuminating conversation, and I think our audience got a lot out of it too. And I'm excited that we'll be able to share it on our YouTube page as well. So thank you so much again, Thomas, and thank you everyone for joining us today. And I hope that you'll be able to join us next month as well for our next art chats, where we'll be speaking with Judy Bales on March 27th, also at noon. So I hope you can join us for that as well. Thanks so much, everyone.
Great.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.